Hey guys, this is Kendall Terry, and this is looking at cells for Biology 1. The first thing to look at when we're talking about cells is what we call cell theory. Cell theory was put together really by three scientists. It was put together by more than that, but we fall back to three main scientific discoveries. The first you can see here in 1839 was Theodore Schwann, this gentleman right here. Theodore Schwann was a zoologist who observed that the tissues of animals had cells. Now, that was an important discovery. Now, we think of that today, and you go, well, of course animal tissues have cells. We know that all living things are made up of cells, but they didn't know that at the time. In 1845, Matthias Schleiden was a botanist that observed that the tissues of plants contain cells. So they're working together to get a grasp of understanding life. So we say, okay, animals are made up of cells. Plants are made up of cells, and then in 1850, Rudolf Virchow reported that every living thing is made up of vital units called cells. And he also predicted that cells come from other cells. So he says everything I look at that's living is made up of a cell, and every time I'm seeing a cell made, it's made from another cell. So all living things must come from cells, and cells must breed other cells. Now, this all leads to what we know today to be cell theory. Cell theory says that number one, every living organism is made up of one or more cells, and we know that to be the case. Everything from the prokaryote, the very basic unicellular level, to a multicellular complex organism, is made up of cells. Once you go below the cellular level, you don't have a truly living thing, and that's part of the problem with viruses, is that viruses go below the cell level. They don't have all the things that constitute them being cells. Number two is the cell is the basic unit of structure and function. It is the smallest unit that can perform life functions, things like metabolism, things like growth and development, things like homeostasis. Those things that really make up a living organism is performed by the cell. And when we get below the cell, that's just not the case. The third is that all cells arise from pre-existing cells. So cells have to have a cell to make another cell. In other words, life doesn't just miraculously start over here on the side all by itself in the current situations that we have today. Now, it is called a theory because it's a working model. It's something that we're still understanding more of today. And it's something, as we understand more about cells, we go back and look at theories and go, okay, is there anything we need to modify here? Is there anything we need to change? It's always up for discussion in the science community. So if we're looking at cells, let's identify some things that all cells have, or some parts, I guess, that you could say all cells have. The first is ribosomes. Ribosomes make proteins for use by the organism. So it could be the proteins it's making for that one cell, if it's only a bacterial cell, or it could be a protein that's being used for your multicellular organism. You've got proteins that are made in your brain that aren't used there. They're used down maybe in your digestive tract, or they're used in other parts of your body to cause other things to take place. The cytoplasm is a fluid material within the cell. It's really that background that's holding everything in there. And sometimes it's described as a fluid-like substance because it's not necessarily water, which is what a lot of students try to think of as just this water inside the cell. That's not really the case. It's a thick kind of liquid that stuff can move through, but it helps hold everything in place as well. DNA, which is the genetic material inside the cell, we'll talk more about DNA later on. The cytoskeleton, which is the internal framework of the cell. All cells have this internal framework that's holding everything in place and helping stuff travel through the cell and different things like that. And then finally, the cell membrane. This is the outer boundary. Some things can cross the cell membrane, some things can't. So we call this selectively permeable. But every cell, whether you're a bacteria, one cell, or you're a plant, or you're a fungi, or you're a protist, or you're an animal, you have these 5 characteristics in every one of your cells as it's being made. Now, once it gets to maturity, some cells will lose, like a nucleus maybe, where they'll lose their DNA as well. But When they're maturing, they have these. At maturity, sometimes they're specialized and they lose one of these functions. Let's look at the simplest cell first, which is the prokaryotic cell. First cells to inhabit the earth. They're very simple. They're just one cell. We call them bacteria. These cells do not have a nucleus. Their DNA is circular and floats in the cytoplasm. We'll see a picture of that in just a minute. And the cell wall that surrounds the cell membrane provides structure and support. And it actually gives them a particular shape. So bacteria, many of them are called names based on their shape. It may be, for instance, streptococcus that causes strep throat is a circular bacteria, and that is the designation of the word coccus in there. Whereas something that's bacillus is rod-shaped, kind of like the one that you see right here on the screen. Some bacteria have a tail-like structure called a flagella that helps them move, and it moves in a circular fashion like this. Okay, and as it whips around, it sometimes can even be used to help generate energy in the cell. Some bacteria will also, as you can see here, have a capsule that surrounds them and helps them avoid the body's immune system. You may have had a bacteria that was really hard to get rid of, like a strep throat bacteria. It could have been encapsulated, which is a sugary type material that helps it avoid being recognized. Here we have an image of some bacteria. Of course, here you can see a microscopic image of the plasmid, which is an extra piece of DNA that the bacteria has. Here's the circular DNA that's inside the bacteria. Notice that it does not have any membrane-bound organelles in there. It will have ribosomes, but ribosomes are not membrane-bound. Here's a picture of what some look like under a microscope, and you can see the particular shape of this one. This is the bacteria that causes anthrax. In eukaryotic cells, these are cells that are found in plants, animals, protists, and fungi. The cell is composed of four main parts. You have the cell membrane that surrounds the cell and is selectively permeable about what comes in and out. The cytoplasm, the nucleus, which is the control center. It's what houses the DNA, and many times we think of it as the brain of the cell, but we need to move to a better definition there, and it's really what houses the genetic material, in this case the DNA. And there's organelles in there. Those are small structures that carry out specific functions. They're named organelles, thinking of the thought of being little organs as they were being discovered. It was like these little things in there that performed a function similar to maybe your stomach or your intestines or your brain. There's various things there, but there's these little packages of material in there that do a specific function, and we call them organelles. We're going to look at some of these organelles throughout this lecture. The first is the nucleus, usually found at the center of the cell. It has a nuclear membrane with pores in it, and you can see the pores here in this nucleus, all these little holes. This is important because this is how stuff gets in and out of the nucleus. It also contains an organelle called the nucleolus. The nucleolus is which is where the cell's ribosomes are made. And when you look at this under a microscope, it's actually a really dense area of the nucleus. It's thick. It's easy to see. It looks exactly like it does here in the picture. Here you have the animal cell. This is a graphic rendition of that animal cell. And you can see all the many pieces and parts, but it's kind of hard to identify everything here. So we're going to go to more of this just standard hand-drawn looking image of the cell. So if we start at the nucleus, we've got the nucleus with the nucleolus, DNA in there surrounded by this nuclear membrane. Then as we come out, we've got the endoplasmic reticulum. In this case, the first part here is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Then the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, which are very important to the cell's function, mitochondria, and then, of course, the cell membrane as well. And we're going to go into detail in the next lecture about each of these.